Hi, I'm your host Satwan, and welcome to this episode with Francesc Altisent from MangoPay. If you'd prefer to listen to the audio version of this podcast, simply visit thepayments.show in your web browser and you'll get a list of all the episodes along with links to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks and enjoy the episode. Francesc, welcome to the Payment Show.
Hey, Sat. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. I'll get straight into it and give you an intro, if that's okay.
Cool.
So, Francesc, you're the Vice President of Product at MangoPay. It's a solution that provides payments for the world's largest and most innovative marketplaces and platforms. And the key thing is it's a very modular and flexible solution for customers. I wanted to start off with some quite surprising stats that I found anyway in research for the episode. So, globally, 35% of all online purchases are made on a marketplace.
Indeed.
And in Europe, 85% of retail visits online, customers go to marketplaces. That was really surprising to me because I suppose like most people think of marketplaces in, say, the UK or the US. You think of eBay, Amazon, Airbnb, and maybe one or two others. I didn't realize the extent to how big the market is.
Yeah, there are many more. Actually, let's say when you look at our merchant population, we kind of notice that, as kind of you say, many people just think on the large branded names, but actually, pretty much now every relatively mid to large merchant online actually is trying to diversify their business and diversify their risks, and actually building a marketplace and actually being supported for that is actually a very nice way to actually enable that type of business.
When you say businesses are trying to diversify their risk, you mean diversifying it away from Amazon and eBay, just the big players?
Absolutely, and not only think about, let's say, for instance, an online marketplace, let's say a supermarket, right? As a supermarket, you can have your stock in your large warehouse out of the large city, or actually you can sell not only basically your goods and services, but also you can enable other, let's say, local sellers that actually want to sell their tomatoes and carrots basically online through your online supermarket. Well, that diversifies your stock risk, it reduces a certain amount of costs, and at the same time, basically, you are fostering local economy. So it's a nice way to actually move forward.
Interesting. So I guess that one of the reasons I was surprised at the stats from your company was just because it's so hard to start a marketplace and get the momentum going because you've got the problem on both sides, right? The supplier and the customer side. So where are you seeing the growth in these marketplaces mainly?
Yeah, mainly in terms of growth on marketplaces, we see two parts, right? For already established marketplaces, basically the focus is mostly on they are going to get more sellers. They are going to basically extend their value proposition and basically going to be able to actually reach to more people. On the other hand side, since kind of marketplaces are actually kind of more and more present, basically we are going to have more and more payments actually being processed through our platform because basically they are having more and more volume. So actually it kind of goes on both sides. It's a bit like the flywheel that typically other marketplaces will produce. It's kind of what we see for us in terms of actually generating volume. And so that's one part is kind of on the existing merchants. And when we talk about new merchants, it's kind of what we just talked a second ago, right? New regular merchants actually enhancing their value proposition or their business so that actually they can get into the marketplace business.
I want to touch on a couple of case studies, which I normally do later in an episode, but I want to bring it right to the front because it's very key. So some of your customers are Vinted, and as a watch guy, I was surprised to hear that you've got Chrono 24. So that was good to see that. So there's some huge marketplaces there, and with the watch side, security is really important because you don't want to be selling a 10 grand Rolex watch to a scammer. And with Vinted, you've got another set of complexities, which is people selling to each other as opposed to you buying from a merchant. And that's just two examples. So your solution has to cover a lot of different scenarios, right? So how do you do that?
Yeah, so actually, indeed, when you look kind of at the type of business cases that actually we cover, basically there are different flavors, right? Some people call that, let's say, more the peer-to-peer markets. Basically, when you as consumer you sell to, let's say, your friend as also consumer. That's kind of the type of marketplace as Vinted, for instance. And there, basically, what we actually need to make sure, basically, is first fraud on when the transaction comes. Basically, there is a typical payments fraud to ensure that somebody is not trying to use a stolen car, for instance, to buy your goods and services, or for whatever other reason. And then to fulfill that service, basically Vinted, or let's say the marketplace of record, would also be very interested in actually releasing the funds to you as a seller only at the moment that actually you have shipped the goods, or that eventually, let's say, the receiver of those goods confirms that those are received. So basically that capability and actually that flexibility of our marketplace is actually what is very important. And that's one of the things that we are very proud of, is when you look, let's say, most likely you have heard about very large, let's say, marketplace providers in the payments space that are absolutely vertically integrated, and that's actually something that we are proud of not being one of those. And when we say that we are proud of not being fully vertically integrated, it actually means that actually we give the flexibility to the marketplaces on our side to actually decide, hey, you want to use your payment provider of choice? Please be our guest and use it, and send us the funds at the end of the day or at the end of your settlement cycle, so that actually we can kind of keep them in confidence in our, let's say, a regulated environment, and then distribute it to your sellers when actually you give us the indication. So actually that enables, for instance, to cover very well, I would say, the typical peer-to-peer market. When we are talking, I think, about more, as kind of you pointed out, professional marketplaces, basically there, what is maybe more interesting, or let's say, Chrono24 is, I think, is not only professional, there are also individuals actually buying and selling watches, but is kind of guaranteed. Is exactly the same mechanism. However, there, since the transaction amounts are actually much larger, what we are going to be very careful of is actually which payment methods are actually we offering to the consumer. So, for instance, do you want as merchant that there are transactions of tens of thousands of grand in your marketplace, and then basically pay the subsequent interchange and scheme fees to the card schemes? Or you would actually rather prefer to actually pay those transactions through a bank transfer, for instance, because for whatever reason, you as consumer, you feel more secure also, and as marketplace, of course, well, it's more economical. So actually providing that flexibility in both the structure of the marketplace as well as the payment methods on both in and out that are provided, and having flexibility on the corridors. You are not going to buy your watch from the UK, but eventually from a gentleman that is selling it from Japan. So basically having that and having that flexibility is actually what makes us fairly unique.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to learn that the merchant, for example, can choose their existing payment provider if they want to.
Yes.
Which I found quite surprising, but again, it's that differentiation for you, isn't it? That's what I was
Yeah,
wondering before the
absolutely.
call.
And exactly. And one of the very interesting things is, I'm sure that in your past chapters, when you cover payment orchestration, basically the question is there, is payment orchestration a thing or not? And actually what we are seeing is that when you are a marketplace and you go over a certain limit, basically you will be willing to actually diversify your risks. And your payment provider at the end of the day is actually a risk. So actually you want to have more than one. So actually you can pick and choose what is the best for each, which are the best fees, which are the best choices, and actually that is something that we enable.
Yeah, especially as I'm seeing more and more people getting shut down from Stripe.
I saw the
If you just
news.
have one, I mean, Stripe's amazing as long as you're all good and not on their radar. And you may not have done really anything that wrong, and they'll just shut you down. And I get so many inquiries from my YouTube channel and on email saying, "I've been shut down. What do I do?"
Yeah, that's actually a very, very unfortunate situation. I mean, when you are behind the scene, you actually understand why they do that. However, as kind of many people, I was reading also the news there, is that as many people was pointing out, basically maybe the data that they are using is not accurate, and actually the kind of that goes to the point of how useful or how valuable or how essential actually data in payments is. And I think that is kind of something that we also take a lot into account, is actually we provide you flexibility. It's true that when we do for it, we provide acquiring services. We also have that kind of top of sort of restrictions, like we are going to make sure that, let's say, what is your fraud rate, what is your chargeback rate, basically make sure that kind of there are no fraudsters, or let's say have the entry door properly controlled, so effectively payouts can actually be successful without much error. But yeah, that's actually something that especially merchants that are small need to pay attention to.
Yeah, excellent. I want to talk about the use cases for your solution, because we've talked about the consumer marketplace such as Vinted so far. We've got that business to consumer marketplaces. We've got business to business platforms. rental marketplaces. So there's ski chalet. There's a customer of yours
Yeah.
that rents out ski chalets. Retail marketplaces and product marketplaces. So there's one in Germany called mobile.de,
Yes.
which is that selling cars?
Correct, effectively. So that mobile.de says or does
Okay.
have actually they have two marketplaces, or actually, if you look in Europe, there are a number of those that actually have the same business model. Is they initially started as a like a Craigslist, basically just advertisement things or advertising in this case cars, and then they transition to a model in which actually they are the intermediary. So basically, you pay to mobile.de for actually the car that you are going to buy basic, or when you say you pay them, effectively you pay us and we keep the money safe and trusted, and then kind of the seller of the car is going to ship the car to you where the car is signed as received. Effectively mobile.de is going to instruct car received, here is the proof, and then it's going to move the money to actually the seller wallet, and then the seller can actually decide at which point actually they want to withdraw the money to their bank account, or if they want to do something else, because not all sellers in mobile.de are professional, but also they are some individual. You can actually use that car, that same money that is actually in your seller wallet, to cycle it in the ecosystem as actually a way to actually buy, for instance, your next occasion car.
Yeah. I wanted to put a scenario to you. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a hypothetical customer of yours that you don't have. So at the moment, they could use Stripe marketplace solution with a team of developers and build something from scratch. Very expensive. It's going to take a lot of time. You've got the other extreme where you've got the kind of Squarespace or Wix websites of marketplaces, which is like ShareTribe. That's one of the ones I know,
Yeah.
which will get you off the ground quickly, but it can quickly fall apart if you're a bigger organization. So you've got those two extremes. And, how would you advise a net new customer? They're probably an existing business already, but like you said earlier, looking to diversify their revenue stream. What would be the ideal sort of advice you'd give a prospect like that?
Yeah, so maybe let's start. I think with the first example, right? They are on Stripe. They are fairly small. Let's assume that they are a startup and they are nicely growing. I think that my advice to them would actually be is first let's try to understand how much you know of what's going behind with your funds. So are you in Europe? Are you a cross-border business? Are you doing or suffering effects? Are you actually selling, let's say, to the borders of Europe, like Poland or Nordics, or are you actually selling to the UK? So that would be the first question, to actually understand whether actually they are paying fees that actually they don't really know or want to know. Then the second question is, which payment methods actually are you interested on? Most likely there Stripe can help you with 90% of the payment methods. One of the things that, for instance, those vertically integrated providers tend not to offer is actually, let's say, payment to bank accounts, or what we call virtual IBANs for large amounts. That is very interesting. So what is your ATV, or actually which type of goods you sell? And then once we have assessed that, then the subsequent question is, do you really feel that you are outgrowing Stripe? In sense of, do you feel that some of the use cases or some of the things that actually you want to implement in your business are possible, or you feel that you are kind of reaching the borders? And basically, based on that, it's kind of where we would say, hey, well, it eventually makes sense to actually leverage MangoPay, or eventually, well, it's going to be for another time. And there, when you talk about leveraging MangoPay, there you have multiple blocks. For instance, Stripe has its radar capability that enables to fight fraud. We have our fraud assessment solution that basically behaves in a similar way, and there it really depends on how deep you are into the fraud topic. Wallets, we talked earlier about it, and then when we talk about payouts, well, there is and there it's more importantly about, for instance, the FX component as well as the payout payment methods. One of the things that the vertically integrated providers kind of always have a bit of a hard time with is actually providing clarity on the FX. And typically, you are in the UK, I'm in Europe. Marketplaces that kind of operate in this I think fuzzy border of two currencies is actually where you have the most to win, or eventually the most to lose, if actually you don't really know how much you are being charged for. And that's actually how I would advise and actually try to assess where the problem is. So that's on the one hand side, right? For, I think, relatively large merchant that has an integration, may feel that is becoming good, or may feel that something needs to be changed. Then when you have a merchant that, let's say, it's on Wix or Shopify or any of the alikes, basically there they already have typically, the Shopify Pay or Wix Pay or equivalent kind of that type of value proposition. Most of the value propositions that are offered on that site are mostly focused towards payment acceptance. So the question there is, have you built your marketplace in Shopify, or you have used, instead of that, basically Shopify aligns with the specialized for platforms. We are actually integrated with a number of those, in which what we do is effectively we plugged already at the seller creation. So when, for instance, yourself, Sat, or your friend are actually registering there to sell a pair of socks, effectively we will actually create the sellers on our site so they are ready. So when the disbursement at the end of the day comes, we already have the profiles on our site, so actually payments can go out. So actually for people using those type of platforms that they are not coding too much or they are not interested in coding, there are those marketplace, let's say, marketplace as a service type of solution that basically are going to provide you all the software, and that we are integrated behind some of those so that we can actually help you on that respect. So it's a bit similar, than the PSP typical business where you have, the you have Wix, but for instance, you have Magento, you have OpenCommerce, or you have many others. Basically, for marketplaces, you have the similar solutions, but specialized in marketplacer.
Yeah, and I think this links in one of your team members mentioned in the research that MangoPay is very complementary to T1 acquirers. What does that mean, and why is that a benefit to a business?
For us, if you were to let's say, to say, hey, we as a 500 people organization can compete in payment acceptance with, let's say, Adyen or Stripe, both of them right now, for the last thing I saw, processing in the order of 1 trillion in payment acceptance. Well, I think we could have a long discussion on how good are we, and actually which are the edges that kind of our resources don't get to cover. So that is actually when we say that we are complementary. You can use your specialized solution. Even let me give you an example. Imagine that you are a marketplace, and actually that you have a shop, and actually that you process payments through a point of sale for whatever reason. We don't have a point of sale solution. That's not the focus that we have in our business right now. So we would actually be able to actually receive those payments and then distribute them to the sellers. In that respect, modularity is key. And when you look in the marketplace, one way of, or many people believes that modularity goes against growth. And actually what we are saying is you can be modular and then grow deep in a domain that is growing in itself. In this case, the numbers that you mentioned at the beginning are very important. Is basically 1/3 of the global economy is actually marketplaces. So that is actually where we thrive, and then we believe that we are going to grow more. Is basically serving more marketplaces and diversified marketplaces. And then it's true that our technology also enables you, if you want, to A/B test us against your tier one acquire, just for the sake of seeing, hey, would I benefit from that solution? Yes, you could use it. So that's we enable that, while at the same time not blocking any other options.
Yeah, you've mentioned many European countries in the short time that we've been speaking. So I wanted to ask you about the markets, the countries that you operate in, and where you're looking to expand to, because I imagine you're a fast-growing company.
Yes, absolutely. So basically, in terms of countries right now, we are mostly focused in Europe. So when I say Europe, let's include also the UK for the sake of being all friends. Then what we are working towards after that is basically expanding on all the edges of Europe. So basically have a better and a stronger value proposition for Eastern Europe, in the Balkan area, or eventually in the Nordics. That's actually where our focus is. And then, of course, from still being in Europe, we have the ability to onboard sellers that are, let's say, out of Europe, like for instance the UK, Canada, or Japan, as we have for some of our merchants. But still, we believe that our focus shall stay in Europe, and then extend or become better in those parts of Europe that, let's say, are less familiar to the mainstream PSPs, either the Balkan area or Eastern Europe, or let's say, well, Nordics is kind of a mainstream, but the two former are maybe more interesting.
Yeah, I mean the classic path for an American or a UK company is when they're growing to expand to other English speaking markets. And there's a couple of guys I follow on YouTube marketing. They're in the US as well. Neil Patel, you might know him. He runs a big marketing agency, and he was saying that when he starts a company in the US, he expands to Brazil as the first port of call because he said it's a huge market, and because other English-speaking startups don't go to other countries like that, it's just a greenfield site. So, would you agree with that? For anyone that's growing rapidly, to just look at, like you said, Balkans or other countries where it
Well,
wouldn't be top of mind.
I would really agree. I mean, we are, of course, MangoPay originally started a couple of years back in France, so a non-English speaking country. It's true that from then, let's say, we have grown to all the major markets like Spain, Germany, let's say, Netherlands, Poland, and all others. But let's say English, beyond being the language in which we all speak, basically we are, for instance, providing alternative payment methods in a number of Eastern Europe countries as well as in Nordics, or actually expanding, let's say, to I would say the less obvious places is actually when it's more interesting. I think that it's also very interesting that, for instance, when you look at the UK is a highly crowded market in terms of fintechs. Why? I think most likely for what you point out, right? Everyone can start a business there. Everyone speaks English, so it's fairly easy to actually reach out to both buyers, sellers, as well as decision makers. However, when you start a business in Europe, well, it's true that there are a number of countries in Europe that are more English speaker than others, but effectively having that local flavor and that local understanding, I think, is very, very important. And that extends not only to, let's say, reaching out to decision makers, but also extends to, for instance, PSD2 is a great thing that all of us are in the same directive. However, local regulators put its own flavor into it, and that's actually something that we need to be aware of, and that we are.
Yeah. One subject I wanted to talk about, very key in marketplaces especially, is fraud and security. So the Chrono 24 example just goes without saying because items are thousands and thousands of dollars worth. But just in general, doesn't matter. Like you could get hit by £20 worth of fraud on a marketplace. So how are you covering that problem right now in your solution? And what have you got planned for the future? Because with AI, fraudsters are getting more sophisticated too.
Yeah, so actually one of the companies in our MangoPay group is a company that formerly was called Nethon, and basically they are specialized in fighting fraud. They are specialized at the level that, for instance, they used to support, or still actually do support, some cryptocurrency businesses, and basically they help them in all that fairly complicated area. I think the main difference, would say, when you look at kind of the fraud solutions, and I'm by no means a specialist in fraud solutions, is how deep are you able to characterize the individual that you have on the other side and ascertain, based on that characterization, whether the individual is a legitimate individual or is basically a fraudster, or what I call typically a gangster, right? So basically, that is kind of the technology that Nethon developed, or let's say our fraud component developed over years, which is basically a beacon that actually enables us to actually collect a number of data points across all the internet and basically all the websites where that piece of software is actually planted. And then we can create the image of that virtual consumer. And then based on that image, we assess how risky that consumer is. And based on that, for instance, at payment acceptance, we are going to trigger 3D Secure, typical technology. And, we have PSD2 and certain obligations, but still. And then at payout, we are actually going to leverage the same technology and the same fact that we have characterized a consumer to actually identify, is that consumer actually in let's say a non-trading list, or basically is part of those places or those consumers where we cannot send funds. Basically, we are going to use that same element, the characterization of an individual, the right characterization of an individual, to actually assess it at multiple points of the transaction. Because one of the things that we have maybe eventually mention is we are talking about a transaction end to end. Let's say you selling your watch to Mr. Joe. The question is Mr. Joe gonna do a payout for your watch, or is gonna Mr. Joe wait for he selling 10 watches and then just do one single payout? The fact that the transaction is not one-to-one, but effectively many-to-many, means that we need to take both payment acceptance and the payouts basically completely separated in regards to how we manage fraud. And fraud is very different. At the entrance is fraud, the typical car fraud. However, for payouts, we are talking about money laundering, we are talking about sanction lists, we are talking about other types of fraud that actually need to be also assessed at that apart.
I didn't think about the sanction side of it. Yeah, that's an important one.
Don't try to send money to a sanctioned individual. You can really get in tough trouble.
Oh yeah, you mean like just
Ask a,
sending like a
ask a
thousand
number of
dollars?
banks. Ask a number of banks that appear from time to time in the press about sanctions on money laundering. It's
Yeah,
it's very very expensive.
yeah, good stuff. Was there anything that important that you wanted to get across to somebody looking at a new payment system that I might have missed?
I would say, I mean, in general terms, I think maybe what is interesting to understand, especially in the marketplace topic, is that on the one hand side, marketplaces are, I think, a tool to grow business. On the other hand side, marketplaces are, I think, an opportunity. The question there is that from the decision maker point of view, one shouldn't always think on can I do it or not, but actually which are the conditions to actually achieve that, and whether there is somebody that actually has been in this business for long enough actually can support you on certain angles of that, or well, you can use your regular and provider to actually make it happen. It always depends, but I think I if there is one message that I would like to, I think, share is that marketplaces, and when I say marketplace, take that in the wider sense of the term, basically are here to stay. And if you own a business, the question is how can you expand that business on that direction to actually generate more revenue for yourself.
Yeah, so in other words, so multi-channel is not just selling online versus having a shop. It's about even online having multiple places to sell as well.
Exactly. I had actually never thought about that, but the way you actually say it, I think it's very, very interesting. It's actually a couple of years back, people was talking about omni-channel, right? So omni-channel was just physical places where you sell or virtual places where you sell here, but you are also saying omni-channel is also how you sell.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Well, if anyone is looking to get engaged with you guys and explore your solution, so your website is mangopay.com and on Twitter you're at MangoPay. I wanted to ask you, typically your engagements, what they look like and how quickly businesses can get started on the platform.
Yeah, that actually really depends on the marketplaces, right? Effectively, of course, there is the commercial part, but once the commercial part is agreed, all our documentation is basically online. So you are pretty much free to go there at any point of the engagement and actually decide when you want to start, how you want to start, etc., etc. Depending on the size, we're also gonna support you with a solution engineer, and basically that solution engineer is gonna drive you in case your use cases are more complicated. So it's really, really variable depending on the provider and actually depending on how you're gonna implement these and the use cases that you have.
Yeah. And how do you typically charge customers at a high level? Because a payment company like Stripe is simple, it's percentage of transaction. But obviously, with what you're doing, there's so many moving parts. How do you overall explain how customers can pay for your solution?
Yeah, so effectively, our pricing model is not that far, let's say, from the ones that you mentioned as a Stripe. So basically, there is always a depending on the service that you use, each service has a price, right? So payment acceptance has a price. That's the typical Stripe approach. Payouts has a price. Also, instead of talking about basis points, in that case, mostly we talk about, let's say, fixed amount of fees. And then we have fraud, where there is also a price. And then we have the wallet service, where there are multiple options. But for instance, in order to mutualize the KYC and KYB costs that we are obliged to for all our sellers, we either charge you on a per seller base and eventually, life cycle of the seller, or we are going to decide for a more wider and fixed fee that actually covers all the sellers that you have.
Are there any sort of demos available online with your team, like your engineers? And also, are there any conferences coming up that your company's attending?
Yeah, so basically in terms of demos, we have a number of recorded demos in our documentation website that I invite you to visit. And basically there you can see how the solution works. You can also register for a, let's say, for a demo account, and basically there you can actually see how things works. In terms of demos, for instance, in terms of conferences, for instance, we have this week our team at MRC Barcelona, where basically we are not only focusing on helping merchants with their fraud problems, but also with basically the marketplace solution. I think we are in April, so I think next large conference in Europe is Money 2020 in June, where we will be. And then there are a number of smaller conferences that we are going to be all the way till there.
Fantastic. One final business related question. What are your predictions in the payment space for the next 6 to 12 months or beyond even?
Yes. So for me, one of the things that actually I really feel that is happening, and it feels a bit like a repetition of the story, is that I think during the pandemic, orchestration actually became really hot topic, and there were a number of startups that actually just made appearance. And the question is, and then a number of those basically kind of ramped down because basically merchants were not so keen to actually paying for the services. They want kind of the possibility to actually diversify, but they didn't want to pay for the services. I think that the business has evolved in a way, and I think the three large players have to become so large that actually marketplaces are starting to notice that orchestration is a thing. And I think it feels like a comeback. And eventually orchestration may take a different shape than what it was to originally take. But I think that that's kind of going to be very important. So that's one part. And then when it comes with that is actually it comes about orchestration means flexibility at the end of the day. So maybe I remember when I started in payments, let's say a couple of years back, there was a thing of payment gateways where basically you provided merchants flexibility to actually select and go negotiate. Then it came vertically integrated, where basically there is a provider that does everything for you. Now, kind of merchants have become savvy enough to say, okay, well, though it was great, I want flexibility. And flexibility is not just payment acceptance, as we just mentioned, but it's also KYB, it's also KYC, it's also payouts, and it's also fraud. And that's basically where we have an offer that actually enables to actually cope for all that.
Yeah, I mean, I found when eBay in the UK moved away from PayPal, thank God, to offering,
You had the choice.
the bank, the payouts are great. You can choose, weekly or fortnightly or whenever you want, and it's just great that I can pay however I want. And it was a much better payment experience. I mean, don't get me wrong, PayPal was brilliant, when they started because it was needed, but I think they just got greedy over time.
It's kind of evolution, right?
Yeah, and their exchange rates are awful. If you
well, that's the reason, because we have an FX solution actually. So we do FX in house, and basically you can, from your seller wallet, you pay like for like out. If you have let's say a bank account in the US, you do FX from euros to USD, and then you can do a payout to USD like for like, basically saving yourself the FX.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. Great.
Perfect.
Well, thanks so much for that. I'm going to finish with one or two fun questions at the end, which I always like to do.
That's right.
So number one, what are you reading or watching or listening to right now? Well, and also the funniest or craziest thing you've done for a customer.
Yeah, in terms of reading, we recently got a daughter, so my reading time has actually been substantially reduced. But actually, one of the books that I kind of from time to time like to read, because I think it brings back a number of interesting concepts, is actually The Lean Startup. I think it's a classical, but actually it's always very useful when you are in a fast-paced environment, kind of not to forget the fundamentals and actually make sure that, well, you may fail, but at least you must learn. And I think that that's one of the important lessons learned in the product business. Then kind of on the craziest thing that we've done for a customer, actually it was not a customer, actually it was a large part of our customer portfolio. And it happened a couple of weeks back. So actually, given, let's say, our provider setup, we had to actually migrate most of our payout volume, which actually is a number of billions on a yearly basis, and quite a lot of payments in the 100,000s as well as millions on a daily basis, from one provider to the other, and it was a hard cutover. And actually, we made it happen. I remember the preparation of the team over that, and it was thorough, and actually we succeeded. And I'm very happy that actually the team achieved that big milestone.
That wouldn't be for the faint-hearted, that one.
No, but that's everything. Preparation is key.
Yeah.
And
well, I'd imagine you had a few beers in Munich after that.
It was not in Munich, but yeah, we celebrated.
Okay, good stuff. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today, and it was great to hear about MangoPay, and I was very surprised to learn about your company and what's going on in marketplaces, as I'm clearly wasn't clued up like what the market is doing. So thank you so much, and I wish you all the best in the future with your growth plans.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice one.
Cheers.